The Galactic Dominion had watched Earth for 800 years. Their surveillance probes orbited silently beyond the moon, recording every war, every invention, every stumbling step humanity took toward the stars. To the ancient races who ruled the galaxy, Earth was nothing more than a curiosity. A planet of primitives burning dead plants for energy and strapping themselves to explosive tubes just to reach their own orbit. Ambassador Vexthari stood before the Dominion Council, his 4 eyes scanning the holographic display of Earth rotating slowly in the center of the chamber. His scaled skin shimmered under the artificial light as he delivered his assessment with the confidence of a being whose species had mastered interstellar travel when humans were still living in caves. "They call themselves humanity," Vexthari said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "They have achieved nuclear fission, primitive computing, and basic space travel within their own solar system. At their current rate of development, they will require another 1,000 years to become relevant. I recommend continued observation with no direct contact." The council members murmured in agreement. High Commander Zorkan, a massive being of living metal and ancient circuitry, nodded his approval. The Dominion had encountered hundreds of primitive species across the galaxy. Most were offered protected status, which meant they paid tribute and received nothing in return. Those who refused were conquered. It was the natural order of things. On Earth, in a remote government facility hidden beneath the Nevada desert, Dr. Kate Morrison rubbed her tired eyes and stared at her computer screen. The numbers made no sense. She had been running particle collision experiments for 3 years, searching for evidence of theoretical dimensions beyond the 4 that humans could perceive. What she found that night was something else entirely. "Ben, come look at this," she called to her colleague across the laboratory. Dr. Ben Harris pushed his chair back from his own workstation and walked over. He was a tall man, with kind eyes and a perpetual look of curiosity that had never faded since his student days. He leaned over Kate's shoulder and studied the data scrolling across the screen. "That has to be instrument error," he said after a long moment. "These readings suggest you created a stable tear in space-time. That is supposed to be impossible." Kate shook her head slowly. "I ran the diagnostics 3 times. The instruments are working perfectly. Ben, I think we actually did it. I think we punched a hole through reality." Neither of them slept that night. They ran the experiment again and again, each time producing the same impossible results. A microscopic tear, smaller than an atom but perfectly stable, had opened in the fabric of space-time itself. And through that tear, energy was bleeding into their dimension. Clean, unlimited, impossible energy. By morning, Kate understood the implications. This was not just a scientific breakthrough. This was the kind of discovery that changed civilizations. She made a phone call to her government contact, a serious man named Colonel Ted Barnes, who had overseen security at the facility for a decade. Within hours, the laboratory was surrounded by military vehicles, and Kate found herself explaining her findings to people with stars on their shoulders. General Sam Patterson was the first to truly grasp what Kate had discovered. He was an old soldier, with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen too many wars. He listened to her explanation without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with each word. "You are telling me," he said when she finished, "that you have found a way to produce infinite energy." Kate nodded. "Theoretically, yes. The tear draws power from somewhere between dimensions. It is not fusion or fission or anything we have names for. It is something new." The general was quiet for a long time. Then he leaned forward. "Dr. Morrison, do you understand what this means for national security? For global security? If this technology works the way you describe, whoever controls it controls everything." "I understand," Kate said. "That is why I called you instead of publishing a paper." What none of them knew was that the experiment had not gone unnoticed. Thousands of miles above them, a Dominion surveillance probe detected the energy signature of Kate's tear. The readings were unlike anything in the probe's extensive database. It flagged the anomaly and transmitted the data back to the nearest Dominion outpost. 3 days later, the report reached High Commander Zorkan. He studied the readings with growing concern. The energy signature was small, almost insignificant, but its nature was troubling. It suggested that the primitives on Earth had stumbled upon something that even Dominion scientists considered theoretical at best. Dimensional energy extraction had been discussed in academic circles for centuries, but no one had ever achieved it. This is likely a sensor malfunction, Zorkan told himself, but doubt had taken root in his ancient mind. He ordered additional probes to Earth with instructions to observe more closely. Back in Nevada, Kate and Ben worked around the clock. Within 2 weeks, they had stabilized the tear enough to draw measurable amounts of energy from it. Within a month, they had built the first prototype of what Kate called the quantum tap. It was a crude device, barely larger than a refrigerator, but it produced more clean energy than a nuclear power plant. General Patterson watched the demonstration with the expression of a man who had just been handed the keys to the future. He made calls to Washington. More scientists arrived. More military personnel. The facility that had once been a quiet research station became the most important location on Earth. Kate barely noticed the changes around her. She was too focused on her work, on understanding the full potential of what she had created. Ben stayed by her side through the long nights and endless experiments. He brought her coffee when she forgot to eat and reminded her to sleep when exhaustion clouded her judgment. "We are changing the world," she told him one evening as they watched the quantum tap hum quietly in the corner of the laboratory. Ben smiled at her. "We are. The question is whether the world is ready to be changed." Neither of them could have known how right he was. Neither of them could have imagined that their discovery would soon draw the attention of beings who had ruled the galaxy for 1,000 years. And neither of them could have predicted that humanity, dismissed as primitive and irrelevant, was about to announce its presence to the universe in a way that would shake the foundations of the galactic dominion itself. The stars above the Nevada desert shone cold and distant, but they would not seem so far away for much longer. The Dominion vessel descended through Earth's atmosphere on a Tuesday morning. It was massive, nearly 2 miles long, shaped like a curved blade of polished obsidian. Every satellite tracked its approach. Every news channel broadcast its image. Every human being with access to a screen watched in silence as the ship settled over the Nevada desert, casting a shadow that stretched for miles. Kate Morrison stood in an underground bunker with Ben, General Patterson, and a dozen government officials. They watched the live feed on a wall of monitors, none of them speaking. After centuries of wondering whether humanity was alone in the universe, the answer had arrived without invitation. "They chose this location deliberately," General Patterson said quietly. "They know about the facility. They know about your work." Kate felt cold fear settle in her chest. If these aliens knew about the quantum tap, if they had come to take it or destroy it, there was nothing Earth could do to stop them. Human military power was meaningless against a ship that size. The alien vessel opened a hatch, and a smaller craft descended to the ground. A delegation of beings emerged, led by a tall figure made of what appeared to be living crystal. His body refracted light into rainbows, and his voice, when he spoke, seemed to come from everywhere at once. "I am Ambassador Thalevix, of the Galactic Dominion," he announced to the gathered human representatives who had been rushed to meet him. "Your species has been observed for many generations. The Dominion has decided the time has come for formal contact." The negotiations that followed were broadcast globally. Thalevix spoke with the patience of someone explaining simple concepts to children. He described the Dominion as a coalition of advanced species that maintained order across the galaxy. He explained that Earth existed in unclaimed space, and that humanity was being offered a choice. "Protected status," Thalevix said, "grants your species the safety of Dominion oversight. You will provide tribute in the form of resources and labor. In exchange, no hostile species will be permitted to harm your world." The human negotiators asked about the alternative. Thalevix's crystalline face showed no emotion, but his words were clear enough. Species that refuse protected status are considered hostile to Dominion interests. Such species are pacified for the greater good of galactic stability. Kate watched the broadcast from the bunker with growing anger. This was not diplomacy. This was extortion. The Dominion was offering humanity a choice between slavery and destruction. And they were doing it with smiles and formal language that barely concealed their contempt. "They think we are helpless," she said to Ben. "They think we have no options." Ben looked at her with concern. "Kate, we need to be careful. That ship could probably destroy every city on Earth before we could respond." "Maybe," Kate said. "Or maybe they are not as powerful as they want us to believe. They came here because of the quantum tap. They detected the energy signature. That means they are afraid of what we might become." That night, Kate made a decision. She left the bunker against direct orders and returned to her laboratory. Ben followed her, unwilling to let her face whatever came next alone. Together, they worked through the night, pushing the quantum tap beyond anything they had attempted before. The stable tear they had created weeks ago was microscopic. Kate believed she could make it larger. More importantly, she believed she could look through it. If there was energy bleeding through from another dimension, perhaps there was more than energy waiting on the other side. At 3 a.m, they succeeded. The tear expanded to the size of a dinner plate, and through it Kate could see something that defied description, colors that had no names, patterns that shifted like living things, and energy, vast and unlimited, flowing like an ocean just beyond the edge of their reality. "This is not just a power source," Kate whispered. "This is a doorway. We are looking at infinity. On. Life. On way." Ben stared at the tear with wide eyes. "Can you control it? Can you draw from it safely?" Kate's fingers flew across her keyboard. "I think so. The energy responds to the parameters I set. It is almost like it wants to be used." By dawn, she had designed a new generation of the quantum tap. The original prototype produced enough power to run a city. The new design could power a continent. And that was just the beginning. Kate realized that the dimensional energy could be shaped, focused, directed. It was not just fuel. It was raw potential waiting to be given form. General Patterson arrived at the laboratory as the sun rose. His face was grim. "The Dominion has given us 6 months to accept their terms," he said. "After that, they will consider humanity hostile." Kate turned to face him. She had not slept in over 30 hours, but her eyes were bright with something that might have been excitement or might have been defiance. "General, I need resources. I need the best engineers and scientists this country can find. I need manufacturing capability, and I need it fast." Patterson studied her for a long moment. "What are you planning, Dr. Morrison?" Kate gestured to the glowing tear behind her, to the impossible light bleeding through from beyond their dimension. "I am planning to give humanity a choice that does not involve kneeling. 6 months is a long time, General. A lot can change in 6 months." The general had spent his career making difficult decisions. He had sent soldiers into battle knowing some would not return. He had authorized operations that kept him awake at night. But standing in that laboratory, looking at what Kate Morrison had created, he felt something he had not felt in decades. "Hope. You will have everything you need," he said. "Whatever it takes." Outside, the Dominion vessel hung in the sky like a threat made solid. Ambassador Thalevix waited in comfortable quarters for humanity's inevitable surrender. The Dominion Council expected nothing but compliance from the primitive species that still burned chemicals for fuel. They had no idea what was coming. In laboratories across the country, scientists began receiving classified briefings about quantum tap technology. Engineers who had spent their careers dreaming of impossible machines suddenly found themselves building them. The greatest mobilization of human genius in history had begun, and it was happening in secret, hidden from the alien eyes, watching from above. Kate Morrison stood at the center of it all, guiding the work with relentless focus. She barely slept. She barely ate. Ben stayed beside her, making sure she did not collapse from exhaustion. "We are going to change everything," she told him one night, as they watched a new prototype come online. Ben took her hand. "We already have." 3 months passed. The Dominion waited with the patience of beings who had conquered 1,000 worlds. Ambassador Thalvex sent periodic messages reminding humanity of the deadline approaching. He expected fear. He expected submission. he received only silence. What the Dominion did not see was the transformation happening beneath their notice. Kate Morrison's quantum tap technology had spread to every major research facility on Earth. Engineers worked in shifts around the clock, building and improving upon her original designs. Within weeks, the energy crisis that had defined human civilization for centuries simply vanished. Power plants went offline. Oil rigs were abandoned. The machines that had poisoned the air for generations fell silent, one by one. In their place rose slender towers that drew unlimited clean energy from the space between dimensions. Cities that had rationed electricity now blazed with light at all hours. But energy was only the beginning. Dr. Ryan Cole was an aerospace engineer who had spent his career designing rockets that were slightly better than the rockets that came before them. When he was brought into the quantum tap program, he realized immediately that everything he knew was obsolete. Chemical propulsion, nuclear propulsion, even theoretical ion drives were children's toys compared to what this new energy source made possible. Within 6 weeks, Ryan had designed an engine that could accelerate a ship to 90% of light speed in under an hour. The mathematics should have been impossible. The energy requirements alone would have drained the sun. But the quantum tap did not care about mathematics. It drew from a source that had no bottom, and it gave freely to anyone who knew how to ask. The first test flight took place over the Pacific Ocean. A small, unmanned probe launched from a floating platform, engaged its new engine, and disappeared into the sky so fast that tracking stations lost it for nearly 10 seconds. When they found it again, it was orbiting Mars. General Patterson received the news in his command center. He stared at the report for a long time without speaking. Then he picked up his phone and began making calls. Dr. Lisa Grant was a materials scientist who had once believed that certain physical limitations could never be overcome. Metals could only be so strong. Armor could only be so light. These were facts written into the laws of the universe. Then she discovered that the dimensional energy from Kate's tear could be used to restructure matter at the atomic level. She built an alloy that was lighter than aluminum and stronger than anything that had ever existed. She built another that could absorb and redirect kinetic energy, making it essentially immune to physical impact. She built a third that conducted electricity so efficiently that it seemed to violate thermodynamics. Factories that had taken months to produce a single aircraft now turned out impossible machines in days. Construction projects that would have required years were completed in weeks. The infrastructure of human civilization was being rebuilt from the ground up, and most of the world had no idea it was happening. General Patterson established the United Earth Defense Force in secret. He recruited from every military branch, every allied nation, every private security firm that could pass the security clearances. Young officers like Captain Danny Webb and Lieutenant Megan Price were among the first to arrive at the hidden training facilities. Danny Webb had been a Navy pilot, one of the best in his generation. He had flown everything from fighter jets to experimental aircraft. Nothing had prepared him for the ship they showed him on his first day. It was beautiful in a way that military hardware rarely managed to be. Sleek and powerful, with lines that suggested speed, even when it was standing still. The engineers called it a fast attack corvette. Danny called it a dream come true. The controls are intuitive, his instructor explained. The ship responds to thought as much as input. You do not fly it so much as wear it. Danny's first flight changed him forever. The acceleration was smooth and relentless. The ship moved through the sky like water flowing downhill. Effortless and inevitable. When he pushed the throttle forward and felt the world blur around him, he laughed out loud with pure joy. Megan Price took a different path. She had been an Army officer, a logistics specialist who understood how to move mountains of supplies across impossible distances. The Defense Force needed people who could think at scale, and Megan could think bigger than almost anyone. She designed the supply chains that would keep human fleets operating far from Earth. She calculated fuel requirements that did not technically exist anymore, and maintenance schedules for machines that never broke down. She built the organizational framework that turned a collection of prototype ships into an actual navy. The Dominion surveillance probes detected increased activity on Earth, but they could not understand what they were seeing. Human energy signatures had increased by a factor of 1,000. New structures were appearing faster than the probes could catalog them. Ships were being launched into orbit at a rate that should have been impossible for a primitive species. High Commander Zorkan received these reports with growing unease. Something was wrong. The primitives were not behaving like primitives. He requested permission to send a reconnaissance fleet to investigate more closely. Ambassador Thalvex dismissed his concerns. "They are frightened," he said. "This is what frightened species do. They thrash and struggle before they accept the inevitable. Give them time. They will kneel." The reconnaissance fleet was sent anyway. 12 ships, small and fast, designed for observation rather than combat. They approached Earth's orbit with their weapons powered down, expecting nothing more than a closer look at the panicking primitives below. None of them made it home. The human ships that intercepted them appeared without warning. One moment, the Dominion scouts were alone. The next, they were surrounded by vessels that moved faster than any ship the Dominion had ever built. The battle lasted less than a minute. Dominion shields, designed to withstand anything in the known galaxy, collapsed under weapons that seemed to fold space itself around the target. High Commander Zorkan received word of the loss with something that might have been fear. 12 ships, crewed by experienced officers, destroyed in seconds by a species that had been burning fossil fuels just months ago. It was impossible. It was terrifying. He demanded an immediate military response. Ambassador Thalvex, for the first time in his long career, was silent. On Earth, Kate Morrison watched the battle recordings with grim satisfaction. The weapons worked. The ships worked. Humanity was no longer defenseless, but this was only the beginning. The Dominion would respond with overwhelming force. They would send hundreds of ships, maybe thousands. And when they did, humanity needed to be ready. Kate turned back to her work. There was still so much to do. 6 months after first contact, humanity did not send a message of surrender. They sent a fleet. Admiral Kate Morrison stood on the bridge of the flagship, a vessel called the Dawn of Terra that measured nearly a mile in length. She had never imagined herself in a military uniform, let alone commanding an armada. But the world had changed, and she had changed with it. The scientist who had accidentally torn a hole in reality was now the woman who would decide the fate of her species. 200 ships followed her through the void. Each one was equipped with quantum tap reactors that drew unlimited power from between dimensions. Each one carried weapons that could collapse space-time around enemy vessels, destroying them instantly without explosion or debris. Each one was crewed by men and women who had trained for this moment with desperate intensity. Captain Danny Webb commanded one of the fast attack wings. His squadron of 30 corvettes flew in perfect formation. Their pilots linked through neural interfaces that allowed them to move as one. He had never felt more alive than he did in that moment, racing toward a battle that would determine whether humanity survived or fell. Lieutenant Megan Price monitored the fleet's logistics from her station aboard a support carrier. Supplies, ammunition, medical equipment, repair drones, everything flowed through her systems, and everything was exactly where it needed to be. She had spent months preparing for this operation. Nothing would fail because of poor planning. The journey to the Dominion capital world took 3 days. Human ships could cross distances that would have taken years with traditional propulsion. They arrived without warning, their dimensional engines leaving no trace that Dominion sensors could detect. The capital world was called Thalvex Prime, named for the ambassador's species who had founded the Dominion 1,000 years ago. It orbited a blue giant star and served as the administrative center for an empire that spanned 10,000 light-years. 20 billion beings lived on its surface. Its orbital space was protected by the largest concentration of military vessels in the known galaxy. When the human fleet appeared, alarms began screaming across every frequency. High Commander Zorkan received word of the incursion within seconds. He was aboard his command vessel, a dreadnought called the Eternal Order that had never lost a battle in 300 years of service. He ordered the Dominion fleet to engage immediately. 12,000 ships answered his call. Cruisers, destroyers, carriers, dreadnoughts. The combined military might of a civilization that had conquered countless worlds and crushed every enemy that dared to oppose them. They outnumbered the human fleet 60 to 1. The battle began. Dominion vessels opened fire with weapons that had burned planets and shattered moons. Energy beams and plasma cannons and gravity torpedoes streaked toward the human formation. The firepower was overwhelming. It should have reduced the primitive invaders to atoms in seconds. Human shields held. Kate watched her tactical displays with calm focus. The Dominion weapons were powerful by any standard measure. They would have destroyed anything else in the galaxy. But human shields did not operate by standard measures. They drew power from the same infinite source as the quantum taps, absorbing incoming energy and redirecting it harmlessly into dimensional space. All wings, engage, Kate ordered. The human fleet moved. Danny Webb's attack wing accelerated toward the center of the Dominion formation, moving so fast that enemy targeting systems could not track them. His weapons fired in rapid sequence, each shot creating a momentary fold in space-time that crushed enemy vessels like paper in a fist. Ships died by the dozen, then by the hundred. Dominion crews barely had time to understand what was happening before their vessels ceased to exist. The weapons that had protected the Galactic Dominion for 1,000 years were useless. Their shields might as well have been made of glass. High Commander Zorkon watched his fleet being systematically destroyed. He ordered tactical retreats and flanking maneuvers and concentrated fire on the human flagship. Nothing worked. The primitives moved through his formation like predators through a herd of prey, killing at will and suffering almost no losses in return. 11 minutes after the battle began, it ended. The Eternal Order drifted powerless in space, its engines disabled by a precision strike that had somehow bypassed every layer of its defenses. Zorkon stood on his darkened bridge, surrounded by the bodies of his bridge crew, and waited for death. It did not come. Instead, a human shuttle docked with his crippled vessel. Marines in powered armor swept through the corridors, securing every compartment with brutal efficiency. They did not kill unless they had to. They were not here for slaughter. They were here for something else. Kate Morrison walked onto the bridge of the Eternal Order 30 minutes after the battle ended. She still wore her admiral's uniform, but her eyes held the same curiosity that had driven her as a scientist. Zorkon was the first being she had ever met who was not human. Despite everything, she found herself fascinated. "Your fleet is destroyed," she told him. "Your capital is surrounded. Your empire has lost." Zorkon's metallic body seemed to sag. "How? You were primitives. You were burning chemicals for fuel. You had no weapons, no ships, no understanding of what the galaxy truly was. How did you do this?" Kate considered the question. She thought about the accident in her laboratory, the tear that had opened between dimensions, the infinite energy that had poured through. She thought about the months of desperate work, the brilliant minds that had come together to build something impossible, the sheer stubborn refusal of her species to accept the role the Dominion had chosen for them. "You made a mistake," she said finally. "You assumed we were what we appeared to be. You assumed our path would be the same as yours, slow and gradual over millennia. You never considered that we might find a shortcut." "A shortcut to what?" Kate smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "To everything." She left Zorkon under guard and returned to her flagship. There was still work to do. The Dominion Council needed to understand that the old order was finished, that the galaxy would no longer be ruled by those who had simply been there longest. Humanity had announced its presence to the universe. Now they would dictate the terms of what came next. The Dominion Council chamber had stood for 1,000 years. Its walls were carved from stone, taken from 100 conquered worlds. Its ceiling displayed a living map of the galaxy, with Dominion territory glowing in cold blue light. For 10 centuries, the most powerful beings in known space had gathered here to decide the fate of trillions. Now they sat in silence while a human woman addressed them. Admiral Kate Morrison stood at the center of the chamber, flanked by Marines in powered armor. She had removed her officer's cap, and her hair fell loose around her shoulders. She looked tired. She felt tired, but there was still work to do before she could rest. "The old order is finished," she told the assembled counselors. "Your protected species system ends today. Every world you have claimed as tribute, every species you have subjugated, Every being you have treated as lesser, because they were born on the wrong planet. All of it ends now. Ambassador Thalavex's crystalline form flickered with barely contained fury. You cannot simply dismantle 1,000 years of civilization. The Dominion maintains order across the galaxy. Without us, there would be chaos. There was already chaos, Kate replied. You just made sure it only affected the species you considered expendable. She activated a holographic display that floated in the air before the council. These are our terms. Full membership for humanity with equal voting rights. Immediate dissolution of all protected status arrangements. Freedom for every subjugated world to determine its own future. And the establishment of a new galactic assembly where every species has an equal voice. And if we refuse? Thalvex demanded. Kate met his gaze without flinching. Then, humanity will enforce these terms ourselves. We have demonstrated that your military cannot stop us. We would prefer to build something new together, but we are prepared to act alone if necessary. The debate lasted for 7 hours. Some counselors argued for resistance, for rallying whatever forces remained and striking back at the human invaders. Others recognized the reality of their situation and urged acceptance. In the end, practicality won over pride. The Dominion Council voted to accept humanity's terms. Kate left the chamber feeling hollow. She had won. Humanity had won. But victory felt less like triumph, and more like the end of a very long day. There was so much work ahead, so many systems to rebuild, so many wounds to heal. The easy part was over. Now came the hard part. She returned to Earth 3 weeks later. The planet she found was almost unrecognizable. Cities gleamed with new architecture powered by quantum tap energy. Vehicles moved silently through streets that had once choked with exhaust fumes. Poverty, hunger, disease, the old plagues of humanity were fading as unlimited energy transformed every aspect of society. General Patterson met her at the landing field. He looked older than she remembered, worn down by months of impossible pressure. But he was smiling. "Welcome home, Admiral," he said. "The world wants to thank you." Kate shook her head. "I just did my part. Thousands of people made this possible. I want to see Ben." She found him at the Morrison Institute, a new research facility that bore her name even though she had not asked for the honor. He was working in the main laboratory, surrounded by equipment that would have seemed like magic just a year ago. When he saw her, his face lit up with joy. They held each other for a long time without speaking. Words seemed inadequate for what they had been through together. Eventually, Ben pulled back and looked at her with the same kind eyes she had fallen in love with years ago. "It is over," he said. "We actually did it." "Not over," Kate replied. "Different. Everything is different now." They built a life together in the years that followed. Kate stepped back from military command. Leaving the Defense Force in the capable hands of Admiral Danny Webb, she focused instead on the Morrison Institute, working to share human technology with the liberated worlds of the former Dominion. Not weapons, never weapons, but the tools that could transform civilizations, clean energy, advanced medicine, manufacturing techniques that could end scarcity. Megan Price became the Institute's chief of operations, organizing the distribution networks that spread human knowledge across the galaxy. She was good at thinking at scale, and now she had an entire galaxy to think about. Ben worked alongside Kate as co-director, bringing his patient curiosity to problems that had once seemed unsolvable. They argued about methodology and celebrated breakthroughs and built something meaningful together. When their daughter was born, they named her Hope. The Galactic Assembly grew stronger with each passing year. Species that had been enemies under Dominion rule learned to cooperate as equals. Old grudges faded as new opportunities emerged. It was not perfect. Nothing involving so many different beings could ever be perfect, but it was better than what had come before. Not everyone accepted the new order. Former Dominion leaders who had lost their power whispered in shadows and plotted revenge. Extremist factions among various species resented human influence and worked to undermine the assembly. The galaxy was vast, and humanity could not be everywhere at once. But they were watching, and they were ready. 10 years after the fall of the Dominion, Kate stood on the observation deck of Earth's orbital station. The planet hung below her, blue and green and beautiful, surrounded by the ships and stations of a civilization that had transformed itself beyond recognition. She was older now, her hair streaked with gray, her face marked by the weight of decisions that had shaped the fate of billions. Megan Price joined her at the viewport. She had become one of Kate's closest friends over the years. A relationship forged in the crucible of impossible circumstances. "Do you think they will ever truly accept us?" Megan asked, looking out at the stars. "The other species, I mean. We changed everything so fast. Some of them still see us as invaders." Kate considered the question. She thought about the Dominion, about the arrogance that had led them to dismiss humanity as primitives. She thought about the fear that still lingered in some corners of the galaxy, the resentment of those who had lost power and privilege when the old order fell. "Some will," she said finally. "Some never will. But that is not why we did this." "Then why?" Kate turned to face her friend. The stars stretched endlessly behind her. No longer mysterious and threatening, but familiar now. Almost welcoming, because no species should kneel before another. Because power should protect, not oppress. And because we were never as primitive as they believed. She smiled, thinking of the laboratory in Nevada where everything had begun. The accident that had torn a hole in reality and shown her what was possible. We were just waiting for the right moment to rise. Hope Morrison, now 10 years old, ran onto the observation deck calling for her mother. Kate gathered her daughter in her arms and held her close, looking out at the universe that humanity had claimed as its home. The stars waited, patient and infinite. And somewhere out there, new wonders waited to be discovered by a species that had learned it could do anything. The story of humanity among the stars was only beginning.